Good morning, YouTube. Well, I hope you enjoyed the last 4 videos of me helping Jack Austin with his beginning of his bus build, or partway through. Now we're back to our regularly scheduled programming of interesting places. Today I'm at Fort Laramie in southeastern Wyoming. Originally, let's see, in 1834, Fort Williams, which was a trading post, mainly rather small log fort, you know, the kind you see in movies. There was a trading post for the fur trade. They were after beaver, eventually buffalo, and 7 years later, that original fort was torn down, or was sold to the American Fur Company, and was torn down, and a larger adobe one was built. The first one was called Fort William, and then the second one was Fort John. There we go. And then 8 years after that, 1849, it was sold to the U.S. military and became a military post. All of these forts were commonly called, no matter what people, the owners wanted to call it, they were called Fort Laramie. It's on a bend of the Laramie River where it meets the Platte River. And so let's take a look. Behind me is the cavalry barracks, and that was built in 1876, I believe. And let's go take a look around and see what these barracks. This is the biggest building at the fort, and was big enough to hold 2 company of cavalry and some infantry. So let's take a look inside, shall we? Well, this is one of the barracks rooms up in the upstairs of the barracks, and you can see it's like about 13, probably would have been a 14th cot on this side, and there are more. It's a very large room, and as you can see, there's a wood stove in the center. I don't think there would have been one on the other side, so the guys that were all the way at the end by the window, farthest away from the stove, probably had very chilly nights in the winter, while the guys right next to the stove were baking. Having slept in rooms like that, I can attest to that. It does get a little chilly in the back corners. But all these windows, there is a balcony, doors. Summertime, they would have got a nice breeze through, so it would have helped with the heat in the summer. Right next door to the old guardhouse is the ruins of the administrative building. This big L-shaped building. And you can sort of see that the construction was well, here's a piece that fell down, of a limed concrete type of material. I'm familiar with it back home of having cobblestone construction. It's basically lime mixed with sand, and it does hold up to weathering rather well, and so there wasn't any Portland cement like we have nowadays, and so that's, but over the years you can see where it's weathered away. Here's some old rafters up there above this window, still in there for the roof that used to be on the building. But those were the original fort was, like I said, it was wood construction. Then when the American Fur Company took over, they had Mexicans up here who were good at doing adobe, and they built the new fort out of adobe. And then when the Army took over, as time went on and they replaced buildings, they went with a more modern for the time construction. Okay, so this house did house officers, but they, back in the day, they were restricted on how large the officers' quarters could be, so they had split this in half. You can see the wall here between the two sides. Basically, it's 3 rooms downstairs, probably a couple bedrooms upstairs. You can't get up there. But when the reason this building is as good a shape as it is when the fort was decommissioned and in 1890, and they auctioned off the buildings. This was one of the ones that was turned into a one-family house, and kept it well. A lot of people came, and because wood was pretty scarce, there wasn't a lot of trees, all been cut down for firewood. So they came in and they buy the buildings, scavenge them, tear them apart. Those barracks we were in, those actually got turned into a hotel and a dance hall, and people would come from 100 miles around to go to the dances there. So when these cement structures were built as officers' quarters, the one on the end would have been commanding officer, colonel, lieutenants and captains down here. The original adobe buildings were left on the back as back wings, and of course the adobe over the years has disappeared, while the late 1800s concrete still exists. So this is the structure was built in 1849. It is the oldest building in Wyoming, and it was nicknamed Old Bedlam. It was the unmarried officers' quarters, and they think the name Old Bedlam came from the noises and the rowdy nature of the young officer. So we'll go take a look inside here. And as you can see, quite a bit different than the way the common troops were. Got a buffalo robe on the floor, grizzly pelt, fur on the beds. Looks like probably 3 or 4 would be in here, plus the wood stove was added later after the, probably originally it was the fireplaces. And you can see the adobe structure where they built the timber frame and filled in and then plastered over the top of it. And each half had their own cooking area, you know, a smaller wood stove, pantry, probably a cook's quarters in the back because they'd have to get up and make sure breakfast was ready. So this is the post-surgeon's quarters. This obviously would have been his office, probably kitchen in the back. His specimens and scientific things. Because this would have been 1875 when this guy was here, Victorian era, very Victorian looking dining hall, as well as up front here is the parlor with the organ, and of course upstairs would have been the family's bedrooms and so on. Little child's room in here, older children. And then down the hall here would have been the master bedroom. Now the surgeon was educated in Europe and spoke and read Latin, which many educated people did back then. But he was also up on the latest germ theory from Pasteur, and people around here, you know, didn't really know a whole lot about these germ things. They weren't really, hadn't really figured it all out yet, but he is the one who got him to build a healthier guardhouse, a new one. Also, there's a hospital built outside the grounds on a hill, and we're gonna head over there in a minute. But the other thing is, the architects were able to find some historical documents about how the Russians built and the Greeks built, and how they made their materials. So he was able to help them figure out how to make, that concrete I talked about earlier with sand and lime. Excuse me. And so that's why a lot of the newer for the fort structures, at least the walls are still up. The older ones, the wooden ones like the infantry barracks like this, are gone. So this is the Lieutenant Colonel's quarters, specifically Andrew Bert. They call it the Bert House. He lived here from in 1887 and 88 as the fort was being wound down, and compared to most places in the Victorian era, he pretty much had fairly plain furnishings. I mean, nowadays these would fetch a hefty price tag at an auction, but as you see, doors in the front, doors in the back to take advantage of that nice breeze. And here's a little study off the side, nice pocket doors into the family's parlor. And a wing off the back would have been for his servants. And you can see there's a pass-through door that goes in through there, what's set up as the office, which may have been the family's dining room. And as we step outside of here on the back porch and look in the back here, this is the kitchen, pantry, living quarters for the cook in the back. So would have done a lot of the cooking, passed the stuff up through to the front of the house and the Lieutenant Colonel's family. This building is the Post Traders store and complex. He was licensed by the Army and did a profit-making business selling to the troops, the Indians, and this is where all those people traveling the Oregon Trail and off to the gold fields would have come to buy more supplies. Here's also the post office, and of course here's how the store would have been set up somewhat. And I'm sure during the summer months he would have done a booming business, because that was when everybody passing through that wanted to get through the Rockies before the snows closed the passes. So this monument here behind me, it commemorates the fact that this was a major stop for the Pony Express. The Pony Express, only lasted a year, 1860, 1861, and it was still did a big footprint in the history of our country. But when the transcontinental telegraph came through in 1861, and it did come through Fort Laramie at the time, that put the end to the Pony Express, which was way more expensive than sending a telegraph or telegram across the country. So this is what's left of the post hospital, and it was built up here on the hillside outside of the fort. Take advantage of the breeze, and you see how big these windows are. That germ idea was germs don't like sunlight, so sun going in, they planted a lot of sweet smelling flowers around, thinking that germs didn't like this, like good smells, which I find interesting, because on the other side of the building let me get around the side here, and I'm walking into the wind, that is the ruins of the old stables, and this would have been the area where the corrals for all the horses, close to the cavalry barracks. So I'm not sure if the sweet smells coming off of the flowers might have been overpowered by all the horse manure. I'll stand up here where the hill where the hospital is, and looking back over the fort and the areas where the natives would have possibly camped when they were negotiating the treaties, and many treaties were negotiated here at Fort Laramie. I am going to get on the road and see what I can find, and see you in the next video, YouTube. Bye.